My parents sold my childhood home on a Thursday. I found out on a Saturday, when I drove up for what my mother had described on the phone as a family weekend. Nothing specific, just come, we haven't seen you in a while, Yvine. Bring Will if he can make it. I drove 2 hours with Will in the passenger seat, and a bottle of wine in the back, and the particular, low-grade contentment of a person who believes she knows what she is driving toward. I turned onto my street, the street I had grown up on, the street whose every crack in the sidewalk I knew, whose trees I had watched grow from saplings to the canopy they formed now over the road, in a way that made driving down it feel like passing through something. And the house was wrong, not gone, still standing. Heater. But wrong in the way that things are wrong, when the detail that changes everything is small and specific. There was a moving truck. There was furniture on the lawn that I recognized. The wingback chair from the living room, the bookshelf my father had built in the garage when I was 9, the kitchen table, at which every significant conversation of my childhood had taken place. On the front door, where the brass knocker shaped like a pineapple had hung for 23 years, there was a lockbox. I sat in the car. Will said, "Sarah." I said, "I know. I called my mother." She answered on the second ring in the voice of a woman who has been waiting for a call she knew was coming and has been rehearsing her opening. He said, "Sweetheart, I was going to tell you this weekend." I said, "You sold the house." She said, "We got an offer we couldn't. The market was." She stopped. "Then yes, we sold it." I said, "When?" She said, "EB." The closing was Thursday. 2 days ago. The closing had been 2 days ago, and she had not called me. She had let me drive 2 hours toward a house that no longer belonged to my family. That was being emptied of 23 years of my life's material history, while I was in the car with a bottle of wine and low-grade contentment, and she had not called. I said, "Why didn't you tell me, even?" And she said the sentence I have been turning over for the 3 years since, the sentence that contains everything I need to tell you. She said, "We were afraid you'd try to stop it." Stay with me. This story goes somewhere I did not see coming, and some of what I found along the way changed things I thought were fixed. Subscribe if you're new. And if you have ever driven towards something that was already gone. This one is for you. My name is Sarah. I am 37 years old. I am a licensed family therapist in private practice in Philadelphia, which is not an accidental career choice for a person with my specific history. I sit with families every day in the architecture of their unspoken things, the decisions made without consultation, the information withheld to avoid conflict, the protection that becomes its own kind of damage. I know this territory professionally. I grew up in it personally first. My parents have been married for 41 years. My father is a retired electrical contractor, a man of physical competence and emotional economy who expresses love through maintenance. He fixed things, installed things, built things, and those acts were his vocabulary for caring, and I understood them as such from an early age. My mother is a former school administrator, sharp and organized and possessed of the specific capability of a woman who has spent decades making institutional decisions, and has brought that capacity home in ways that are sometimes valuable and sometimes, as on a Thursday closing that her daughter didn't know about. Not. I am an only child. I want you to hold it. I grew up in that house for 23 years. The house was a 1960s colonial in a suburb of Hartford, Connecticut, 4 bedrooms, a yard with a garden my mother maintained with religious dedication, a garage workshop where my father spent his weekend hours in a particular productive silence. It was not a remarkable house from the outside, from the inside it was the container of everything I had been before I became who I am, every version of me, every year of growing up, every meal at the kitchen table, and every argument and every night, I fell asleep to the sounds of a house that knew how to hold its people. I had never considered that it would be sold without my knowledge. This is the thing I have turned over most in the 3 years since. Not that they sold it. They had every right to sell it. It was their house, and their equity, and their decision to make. But that they made the decision in secret, completed it in secret, and summoned me toward the aftermath, without warning. They were afraid I would try to stop it. The question I have lived with since. Hetrun. What did they think they knew about me that made them believe I would? I sat in the car in front of the house for 11 minutes. Will did not tell me what to feel or what to do. Idea, which is one of the central reasons I married him. He sat in the passenger seat, and he was present without performing presence, which is its own skill, and a rare one. Then I got out of the car. I walked up the front path. The path whose stones I had helped my father lay when I was 12, one summer weekend, with mortar, and a level, and his patient instruction. And I stood at the door, with the lockbox, and I looked at the empty space where the pineapple knocker had been. My father came around the side of the house. He was carrying a box of tools from the garage workshop. He saw me and he stopped. I said, "Hi, Dad." He set the box down. He said, "Sarah," I said, "were you going to come get me from the car?" He said, "Your mother wanted to." He stopped. "Yes, we were going to come get you," I said. "The closing was Thursday." He said, "Yes." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at the lockbox on the door for a moment. Then he looked at me. He said, "Come inside. There's still furniture." There was still furniture. The kitchen table was still there. It was the last thing in the house. Everything else had been moved, to the truck, or the storage unit or whatever location my parents were managing their transition through, but the kitchen table was still there, and we sat at it for the last time, my parents and Will and I, in an empty house on a Saturday morning, and my mother told me what she had not told me on Thursday. The sale had been necessary, not chosen, necessary. My father had been managing a financial problem for 2 years that I had not known about. The specific concealed crisis of a man who has spent his career in self-reliance and has found self-reliance's limits and has not known how to name them. 18. The electrical contracting business had declined in his final years. He had retired at 68, 2 years before the sale, and the retirement had been partly chosen and partly the market making the choice for him. The business had been sold for less than expected. The pension was smaller than projected. There were debts, not reckless ones, not the debts of carelessness, but the debts of a business wound down in an economy that did not cooperate, of a retirement that arrived before the preparation for it was complete. They had managed for a year. They had then sold the house, quickly and without telling me, and were moving to a smaller property, a condominium 40 minutes away, already purchased, closing in 2 weeks, I said. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" My mother said, "We didn't want to worry you." I said, "I'm a therapist. My entire professional function is sitting with people's hard things." She said, "You're our daughter. That's different." I sat with that, the logic of it, that the professional capacity for difficulty does not transfer to the personal relationship, that being the person others bring their hard things to does not mean your parents can bring you theirs, was not without validity. I have seen this in my practice. I have sat with adult children of difficult parents who have made the same point in both directions. But underneath the logic was something else. Underneath the logic was the sentence, "We were afraid you'd try to stop it." I said, "What did you think I would do?" My father looked at the table. My mother looked at me. She said, "We thought you might offer to help." I said, "And?" She said, "And we didn't want you to have to." I am going to pause here and tell you what I did not know when I was sitting at that kitchen table in the empty house. I did not know that the financial situation was more serious than what my mother had described. I did not know the full number of the debt, the full picture of the pension, the complete architecture of what my parents were managing. I had been given the outline, enough to understand why the house was gone, not enough to understand what was coming. What was coming arrived 14 months later. I want to tell it in order, because it happened in order, and the order matters. The condominium was in a development called Whispering Pines, which is the kind of name that tells you everything about the development's intention and nothing about its reality. Evil. It was a two-bedroom unit on the second floor of a building that had been built in the early 90s and had been maintained adequately without being maintained well. The specific condition of a property that has never been loved. My parents moved in, and I visited once a month, and I carried the feelings about the house in the long-term account where I had placed them, evilly, which was becoming a crowded account but was functioning. My father adjusted better than my mother. My mother had loved the garden with a dedication that was not simply horticultural. The garden was an expression of something in her, a territory she controlled and cultivated, and which reflected her precision and her care. The condominium had a balcony with room for 2 pots. She planted tomatoes. She tended them with the same devotion she had brought to a quarter-acre. I watched her water them on a June visit and felt something in my chest I did not have a clean name for. Then, 14 months after the sale, my mother called on a Wednesday evening. She said, "Sweetheart, we need to talk to you about something." I said, "All right," she said. "The condominium. There's a problem with the mortgage. I am a family therapist, not a financial analyst. But I understand enough about money to understand what my mother told me over the next 20 minutes. The condominium had been purchased at the top of what my parents could manage, financially, in a moment of optimism about my father's pension that had not been warranted. The pension, it turned out, had a cost of living adjustment that was smaller than projected. There were medical expenses. My father had been managing a cardiac situation he had also not mentioned, which arrived in this conversation as a secondary disclosure that landed with its own weight. The mortgage payment had become, over 14 months, a number that was technically feasible and practically unsustainable. They were behind. Not catastrophically, not yet, but behind, and the trajectory was clear, and my mother was telling me, because the trajectory required a conversation she had been avoiding for 2 months. I said, "What do you need?" She said, "We were thinking, if you were able, alone, just to get current and give us time to restructure." I said, "How much?" She said the number. I sat with it for a moment. It was a significant number. Not beyond my capacity. Will and I had been careful with our finances in the way of 2 people who grew up watching the cost of not being careful, but significant. A number that would require a conversation and a decision and a restructuring of our own near-term plans. I said, "Can I call you back tomorrow?" She said, "Of course." I said, "Mom." She said, "Yes." I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." She said, "All right," I said. When you sold the house without telling me, when you said you were afraid I'd try to stop it, was this what you were afraid I'd find out? The full picture? The pause before she answered was the length of a truth being located. She said, "Yes." Will and I talked that night for 3 hours. We sat at our own kitchen table, a table I have chosen and own, and which will not be dismantled without my knowledge, and we talked about the number and what it meant and what we wanted to do. Will said, What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to help them." "That's not the question," he said. "What's the question?" I said, "The question is what the help looks like, and what we require in exchange for it," he said. Require is an interesting word. I said, "I'm a therapist. I know what happens when help is given without conditions in relationships where the pattern is concealment. The concealment continues. The help becomes a resource that enables the next concealment." He said, "So, what are the conditions?" I said, "Transparency, full financial transparency going forward. If I am going to be part of their financial situation, I need to see the financial situation, not summaries, the actual documents," he said. "Do you think they'll agree to that?" I said, "I think they don't have another option." I called my mother the next morning, told her we would help. I told her the conditions. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "That feels like a lot of oversight," I said. "Mom, you sold my childhood home without telling me because you were afraid I'd find out you needed help. Eat tea. You bought a condominium you couldn't afford and managed a cardiac situation in secret and waited until you were behind on a mortgage to tell me the full picture. The oversight is the minimum condition for me being part of this." Another pause. "Then, your father won't like it." I said, "I know. Tell him it's this, or I can't help." Not because I don't want to, because I can't help someone I don't have information about. That's not help. That's funding a system I can't see. She said she would talk to him. He called me that evening. My father is a man of few words in emotional territory, and this call was no exception. He said what he needed to say in 4 sentences. He said they would agree to the transparency. He said he was sorry he hadn't told me sooner. He said he was proud of me. He said thank you. 4 sentences, every one of them load-bearing. What followed was a year of work, not dramatic work. The undramatic, sustained people. Methodical work of 2 people restructuring a financial situation with the help of a third. I hired a financial planner I trusted professionally, explained the situation, and the 3 of us, my parents and I, met monthly for a year. I saw the documents. I saw the pension statements, and the medical bills, and the credit card balances, and the full picture of what had accumulated in the years of my father's declining business, and my parents' private management of their own crisis. It was worse than I had known, and better than I had feared, which is usually how the full picture compares to the imagined one. We made a plan. We restructured. I provided the bridge loan, documented, with repayment terms, because I am a therapist, and I know that money without structure in family relationships becomes something other than money. My parents resisted the documentation initially. I held the line. We signed an agreement at their kitchen table, in the condominium with the 2 tomato pots on the balcony, and I kept a copy in my files. They are current on the mortgage. They have been current for 18 months. My father's cardiac situation is managed. My mother's tomatoes, I am told, were exceptional this summer. I want to tell you about the house. The childhood one. The one I turned onto the street to find being emptied on a Saturday morning. It was sold to a family with 3 children. I know this because I looked up the public record. I am a therapist. I believe in knowing the things I need to know. And I have driven past it twice in 3 years. The Japanese maple my mother planted in 1994 is still in the front yard. Someone has added a basketball hoop in the driveway. The pineapple knocker is gone from the door, but there is a wreath that suggests the new family has their own idea of welcome. The house is being lived in. Loudly, it appears, and with the specific energy of children who are at the age when a yard is an entire world. I sat in the car the second time I drove past, and I thought about the 12-year-old who helped her father lay the front path stones. And the teenager who left from that driveway for college, and cried in the car, and told herself she wasn't crying. And the adult who drove toward it on a Saturday with wine in the back seat, and arrived to find it already gone. I thought about what my mother had said. "We were afraid you'd try to stop it. I would have tried to stop it, even." They were right about that. Not because I could have, not because it was mine to stop, but because I would have wanted more time, a last visit, a proper goodbye, the chance to stand in the rooms one more time and let them be what they were before they became what they are now. I would have asked for that. I would have made it harder. They sold it without telling me to protect themselves from my difficulty. I understand that now, with more generosity than I understood it on the Saturday morning. I understand it as the act of 2 people who were ashamed and afraid, and who chose avoidance over the conversation that would have required them to be both those things in front of their daughter. It was still wrong, and I understand it. Both of those things are true, and I carry them both. My parents and I have a different relationship now than we had before the Saturday morning, and different again from what we had in the 14 months between the sale and the mortgage call. We have a relationship with more of the actual materials in it. More honesty, more disclosure, more willingness on their part to bring me the hard things before the hard things become crises. This did not happen automatically. It happened because I required it. Not with ultimatums, with the consistent, the clear communication of a person who has decided that the relationship she wants with her parents is one where the information flows before the emergencies, rather than arriving with it. My father sends me his pension statements quarterly now. He does it without being asked. He set up a forwarding, which is the most him possible way to comply with a transparency requirement. Eva. My mother calls me when something is worrying her financially, which is not always comfortable and is always better than the alternative. Last October, my mother told me, in the course of a Sunday phone call, that the condominium association had raised the monthly fees and she was concerned about the impact. She told me in October. The fee increase was in October. Not 14 months later, not after a crisis had developed, evenil. Not in a Wednesday evening call that began, "Sweetheart, we need to talk," in October. As it was happening, I sat on my couch after that call and felt something I recognized from my clinical work as integration. The specific sensation of a system that has been reorganized, finding its new equilibrium. Not perfect, not without the history that preceded it, but functioning, transparent, built on information rather than protection from it. I want to tell you something about what my parents' concealment cost me that is not about the house. The house is the obvious cost. The childhood container, the material history, the stones in the front path, and the pineapple knocker, and the kitchen table I ate at for 23 years. That cost is real, and I have sat with it, and I have let it be what it is. But there is another cost, less visible, that I think about more. When my parents concealed the financial crisis from me, when they when they managed it in secret for 2 years and sold the house without telling me and bought the condominium and managed my father's heart and waited until the mortgage was behind before they brought me into the picture. They were making a decision about who I was to them. They were deciding that I was someone to be protected from their difficulty, someone whose worry was a burden they preferred not to create. Someone who would make things harder rather than help carry them. They were wrong about me. They were operating from an old model, the parent-child model, the one in which the child is protected from the adult world's complications, which is appropriate when the child is 8 and becomes its own kind of damage when the child is 34. And a licensed therapist with a stable income and a genuine desire to be in the full relationship rather than the managed version of it. They did not trust me with their real lives. That is what the concealment cost. Not the house, the trust, the assumption that I was a full participant in this family who deserved the actual information. Here. We are building that now. It is slow, and it is real, and it is the most valuable thing to come out of a Saturday morning I did not expect. Here is what I want to say to you. If you are a person whose family has made decisions about you without consulting you, who has been protected from information that concerned your own life, who has arrived somewhere expecting one thing and found another, the protection was not about you. I mean that precisely. The decision your family made to keep you outside the information, to sell the house before you knew, to manage the crisis before you were told, to summon you toward the aftermath rather than the process, was about their own fear, their shame, their preference for the version of the relationship where they are managing rather than being held. It was not a verdict on your capacity. It was not evidence that you couldn't be trusted with the real thing. It was evidence that they were afraid of the real thing and found it easier to present you with the finished version rather than include you in the difficulty. You deserved to be included. Not to stop it, you may not have been able to stop it, and stopping it may not have been right even if you could, but to know, to be a participant rather than an arrival. To drive toward the thing that was actually there, rather than the thing that was already gone. You deserved the phone call on Thursday. And if the phone call never came, hindi. And you arrived on Saturday and found the truck in the driveway, and the lockbox on the door, hin. And you sat in the car for 11 minutes with the specific grief of a person confronting a completed fact. That grief is legitimate. That anger is legitimate. The full complexity of loving people who did not trust you with their full reality is legitimate, and it does not resolve neatly. And it does not have to. What it can have is a different future. If they will let you build one. My parents came to Philadelphia in August. They stayed for a long weekend, the first time they had visited us rather than us visiting them, which is a small reversal with its own significance. My mother helped me replant the containers on our back porch, which she did with the same focused dedication she brings to any garden-adjacent activity. My father and Will spent an afternoon building shelves in the basement. My father with the hand tools he brought in a canvas bag, because he does not fully trust any tool he has not personally selected. On the last evening, we had dinner at our kitchen table. Our table, mine and Will's, chosen together, solid and permanent and not going anywhere on a Thursday without my knowledge. My mother said, toward the end of dinner, without particular preamble, "I think about the house sometimes, whether we handled it right." I said, "You didn't." She said, "No, my father said we should have called you." I said, "Yes." We sat with that for a moment, here. Not with drama, with the specific quiet of people who have been through a thing, and have said what is true about it, and are now in the same room on the other side. Then my mother said, "The new people painted the shutters green." I said, "I know, I drove past." She looked at me. "When?" I said, "Twice." She said, "What did it look like?" I said, "Like someone else's home, like it was supposed to look." He was quiet. Then she said, "Good." I think she meant it. I think she meant that the house being someone else's home was the right outcome for a house, that houses are supposed to be inhabited, that the point of a house is not the preservation of a particular family's memory, but the ongoing accommodation of human life, in whatever form it takes next. I think she was also telling me something about us, about the way we had moved through the difficulty and arrived somewhere that was not the old place, and was not what either of us would have chosen, and was nonetheless the place we were now. Good. I held it. Subscribe if it's found you. Share it with someone who arrived somewhere and found it already changed. Leave a comment. I read everyone. And if you have ever turned onto a familiar street and found the furniture on the lawn, you deserved the phone call. You still do.